What's up, humans? You're listening to the What is Humans podcast with Shane Strunk and Dennis Kluba. Make sure to follow us on social media, on Instagram at What is Humans podcast, on YouTube at What is Humans podcast, and on TikTok at What is Humans podcast. Today, Dennis and I are discussing falling into place. Enjoy. Hey.
What's going on, guys? This is your first time listening to the What is Humans podcast. This is a personal development podcast that Shane Strunk and myself, Dennis Kluba, have put on for almost 2 years now, and it's all around conversations that happen in our daily lives that help us get a little bit better and figure out what humans are, and hopefully it helps you discover something about yourself and get better as well. And most importantly, we're experts in almost nothing.
What's up, man?
Hey, man. Nothing much. Just to get the elephant out of the room, I had a bit of a tumble this past weekend. It finally happened. I fell off a bird scooter.
Well, this is good. This is a good plug to make our listeners go to our YouTube.
Yeah.
So you can get the visual.
Yeah, you definitely want the visual.
If you're just on Apple or Spotify, I encourage you to go check it out. But
yeah,
it looks much better. Mm-hmm. It happens.
Like I said, it's kind of like sliding into home plate face first. And I just have a little bit of scrape on the side, but a little bandage, never hurt anybody. So we're going to be okay.
Yeah. We're using some new equipment too. So we're getting our reps up. So excited for the strides we're making, and the goals we have for the pod. So
yeah.
Let's get to it. What are we talking about today?
We're talking about things falling into place.
Okay.
This idea kind of came from another creator that was talking about times when it feels like things are falling apart is really the moments when the world, the things around you, your internal thoughts and your identity are really creating the building blocks and things are falling into place for you to become who you're supposed to be.
Yeah. This reminds me just a lot of personal experience I've had of, whether that's injuries in sports or it's life events not going the way you'd like it to be.
Yeah.
If it's death, if it's loss, if it's a relationship, etc. There's these difficult times that, looking back, you could probably identify moments of growth. And I think that's probably what we'll be talking about a lot today.
Yeah.
Of kind of seeing these things in a different light than kind of that narrow view that is we so often have in these difficult times.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think we've talked a little bit about over the past month how it can be easy in certain moments when things aren't going the way that we want them to feel like the world is crumbling around us. And we've talked a lot about looking at the bigger picture and how that can be helpful in seeing, things from a journey perspective as opposed to the immediate gratification that we naturally seek. Do you think that in your experience, like going backwards, have you noticed that times when you've grown the most, that right before that was times of like, maybe you were most lost or you felt like everything was changing?
Just about to quit.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think a lot about, like, I've talked about this so many times on the podcast, but if it's a news story, just like having like a serious injury, like in sports. I had my concussion my junior year of college. I guess what that was for me was kind of career ending. I thought my life was over after that just because all I knew was soccer.
Yeah.
That's what I was good at. That's what I put my identity in. However, it put me on a path to learning a little bit more about myself and figuring out that I wasn't just the sport, or I'm not just the job, or I'm not just something that I label,
Yeah.
or maybe that society labels for me.
Yeah.
That we are much more than the external things that people tell us that we are. So that was just something for me of like, it was a difficult time. I was drinking a ton. I was depressed.
Yeah.
That I just didn't know where to go from there. And looking back, it's like, oh, these things fell into place for me where it put me on a path to better things.
Yeah. No, I mean, that makes complete sense. We were obviously roommates at the time. And I think it was something too where it was going to be another year for both of us until we really had to make the decision whether we were going to pursue soccer, as like a career, like a lot of our teammates and friends did at that time. But you obviously thought that as for junior year, you had 2 more years to make that decision.
Yeah. Well, I had my best soccer ahead of me.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where it was like, it was almost a decision that you knew in the back of your mind you were going to have to make, but to have it cut short, I can only imagine, like we said, this idea of things falling apart literally in front of you is like, oh my gosh, I've spent a lifetime building to this, this thing that gives me so much joy. And, I've spent years getting better, practicing my craft. And now it's just gone.
Question for you. What would you, I guess, rather have? Say you have, it's a job or it's a relationship and the decision or, is made final. It's like for me, for soccer, it was, the neurologist said, hey, you should probably pick up golf.
Yeah.
It was very final. There wasn't really any debate around it.
Yeah.
There, like so often we float through our lives of things being average or okay. And we just don't have any urgency to make changes and make strides for ourselves. You've been laid off before. Layoffs are happening across the country. What is it to having decisions being made for us or life happening for us of this topic around falling into place? Like, why is that better almost than you having to make your own decisions for yourself?
Yeah,
or should we argue that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. For me, and you are completely right, a lot of the biggest changes that have happened in my life have really come off the back of things that I didn't have control over. They happened to me. Yeah. For example, leaving my first job that was in Kansas City that was super difficult that I've talked about before, really that came off the back of COVID happened.
Sure.
And I was like furloughed, but I was still working. But we were getting ready to go back in, and I was like, this just isn't, I can't do this anymore.
Yep.
Whatever. And then, like you said, recently, being in the creative industry and getting laid off, it was like that throughout that time, you mentioned kind of this mundane and average existence that I was kind of floating through.
Sure.
And I really wanted to, and you saw this, we've lived together, where it's like, I really wanted to put more of my energy into what we're doing now, creating this business, really amping up what we do with the podcast. And it was like you said, that decision was made for me of like, hey, like, and I don't know, we don't really talk about a lot of divine intervention on this podcast, but I do think that what we're talking about today with things falling apart and truly they're falling into place for you, there is something to when you're doing the right things and you kind of have you're wearing your heart on your sleeve. I think that the world, and if you believe in, a higher power, things do kind of transpire in your favor, whether you believe that or not, I think.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something too. It's just like the having the, spare chances of, meeting someone or, you landing, you meeting this person, you finding this career, you being able to experience this thing.
Yeah.
It's weird. Mm-hmm. It's weird. And I think that we need to look at these difficult, times that come up so often.
Yeah.
With that larger perspective of okay, what's the lesson?
Yeah.
How can I use this as an opportunity to grow, to learn, to experience things? And I don't mean it to be, hey, we should just avoid the pain and suffering that is life. It's more of like just seeing the light at the end of the tunnel versus just the narrow focused of, fuck, like this sucks.
Yeah, completely. I think one question I have too, and for you, is a lot of times for me, when I think about this idea of, things falling apart, part of me wants to invest less, whether that's in relationships or it's in jobs, because it is, like, hey, like, you don't want to get hurt, right? Because when things fall apart, a lot of the reason that we feel like things are, the whole world is ending is because, like you said, with soccer, you've invested a large amount of time. You've invested energy, you've invested your heart, emotions too. Is it important for us, no matter what we set out to do, knowing that there's going to be times, when things are, falling apart, things are changing, we still need to approach every day like, hey, like, give it your all, and don't be afraid of, things not working out, things falling apart. At least for me, that's a difficult thing to kind of wrap my mind around.
Yeah, I think that it's like, maybe this is a question for us. Like, are we afraid of, stepping out and actually doing our best, or is it like around decisions, or is it something that, like, we're afraid of the failure itself?
Yeah.
So I think that, like, we have to know that we will mess up. Like, things won't be perfect. Like, there's going to be change and so many things that don't go our way each day and week and month, etc.
Yeah.
And if you kind of have that mindset around just do your best versus let's be perfect, is kind of the approach that we need to have.
Yeah. And I think that the only way that those things start to work for you, things start to fall into place, regardless of if you fail, if you, things are falling apart around you on your own accord, or, the world, you get laid off, all these different things, the relationship ends without, your thought processes. The only way that those things work is when you're giving 100% every day. You're putting out into the universe, hey, I am a hardworking individual. I'm trying different hobbies. I'm trying to learn what I love, what I'm here to do exclusively.
Yeah.
And if you're kind of going through life with this idea that, well, nothing matters because it's all going to fall apart anyway.
So I'm not going to try.
Exactly. Those things aren't going to fall into place for you.
Yeah.
Things fall into place for people that are putting themselves out there consistently.
Yeah. It's like you have to play the game if you want to win the game. You have to be out in the, you have to run the miles. You have to do the podcast. You have to, record it. You have to do the things that if you have a dream for yourself, you have to go chase it. You can't just wait for the day to arrive where you can be comfortable to begin.
Completely. And we've talked about this before, like heartache, heartbreak, failure is a part of life. And it's also a little bit of the beauty, which we talked about last episode, of this journey of every great book you've watched, every great movie or read, every great movie that you've watched has these heartbreaking moments of, the hero of the story.
Yeah.
They go through a terrible loss, or, they didn't win their match. They didn't make it to the big leagues. Then they keep going.
Yeah.
And
it's like how we have to write, our own stories. We have to be involved in our own
lives.
Days.
Yeah.
If we want to have the story that we want to tell.
Let's get into how do we begin to take the awareness of things happening around us that feel like everything's falling apart and mold that into understanding that maybe things are actually falling into place for us.
This is such a hard question for us. We've had lots of ideas around this, and it's so hard in the moment to this is the one small piece that fits in this puzzle of my next 10 years. I think what we have to do is first identify similar situations that we've been through in the past.
Yeah.
Of create a list or a cookie jar, if you will, of times that you've been through struggle.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, I actually learned this new skill. I've been through, change of careers. I've been through this thing.
Yeah.
And find these accomplishments. If it's 3 to 5, so be it. Of things that you're proud of that you've got through, that was difficult for you, that seemed so daunting, but now it's like, hey, I got back up. I fell over. Dennis fell off his scooter.
Got back on the bird.
And here you are.
Yeah.
So find things that you can, hang your hat up on.
Yeah.
I think is the first thing. Because by doing that, you can relate that to current events, to something you're going through currently.
I also think that it gives you perspective, like you just mentioned, around recognizing that I remember as a 17-year-old getting dumped at the prom or, whatever that thing is, not making varsity baseball or, not being first chair in the band. That was the most heartbreaking thing.
Yeah.
And now 5 years later, 10 years later, 20 years later, you're like, ugh, that was nothing, right? But it's all relative to where we're at in our lives. And so that's where it's like using that as perspective of things that you've gone through before and how it's gotten you to where you are today kind of helps you remember, okay, this really sucks right now and it does not feel good, but there is tomorrow. I'm going to figure out how to get back to where I need to be.
Yeah.
Right.
I think another could be of just remember how small we are within the grand scheme of things. I think it's just understanding that the earth is spinning.
Yeah.
In space. We have so many seconds, so many days, so many, years to live, so many experiences. Everyone is worried about themselves. They're not worried about you.
Yeah.
And we just have to remember that we are smaller in this larger story, and we can only control what we can control. So I think just giving perspective of how small we are within it, is important too in this.
Completely. Because of outside circumstances, we are rewatching bits and pieces of Game of Thrones. And literally the other day, last night, I think Theon Greyjoy was saying something about, legacy and how in 100 years, nobody will remember any of this stuff. And like you said, this idea shrinking down is that your world is falling apart. My singular, small, very minute world is crashing.
It's just your ego might be hurt this day.
Exactly. Versus this massive picture within the grand scheme of things. If, something goes wrong during that day, number one, you're going to figure it out.
Yeah, you're going to get over it.
Yeah.
They're going to forget about it. It's going to be one day in 1,000 days of your story.
Yeah.
So it's just that perspective we need to have.
Completely. As far as the third, kind of how we begin to flip the mentality from my world is falling apart around me to the world is falling in place for me, is I think it truly is that mindset shift of, okay, this thing that I used to know isn't there anymore. It's not what it was. It's almost immediately looking at things as an opportunity as opposed to, like we said before, okay, I'm reacting to a failure, a loss, etc.
Yeah. It's like being grateful for, this is a opportunity, like you said, for me to improve. Yeah. To try this new thing, to take on this challenge, to overcome something versus blaming and becoming stagnant from a certain event or some external factor. So it's taking that as an opportunity, like you said. I love that.
Yeah. I think those are the most important things that we can talk about. So why are we talking about this today?
Yeah, I think this is just a practice that I don't think we'll ever master.
Yeah.
Like we're always going to be frustrated, with negative things happening, negative circumstances, events, change, etc. And I think it's more of a mindset that we can instill is seeing this in a different light versus that narrow focus that we talked about of, everything's falling apart.
Yeah.
So again, it's just kind of that mindset shift and practice that, like, in the hows we went through, why this is so important for me.
Yeah. I think too, you mentioned it a little bit in the house section. For myself, when you were talking about, things are so minute,
Sure.
And you're a small blip within the world, the universe, etc. I saw a clip, and Shane and I both love this movie, but it was from like Pursuit of Happiness, and it was when Will Smith towards the end of the movie, he finally gets the job from the internship.
Okay.
Yep. It's the climax of the story.
Sure.
But you go back and you look at hardship that exists like in the world and, like how bad things could be. And then you come back to your life for whatever that thing is that feels like the world around you is just crumbling. You can be like, for me at least, I take a deep breath and I say, okay, I could be unhoused, sleeping under a pier, crippled in debt.
Sure.
And I just can't get out. And I got nothing going for me. Instead, it's a good reminder, and it was a good reminder for me of, okay, I have amazing family and friends around me that I know are there to support and help me get through.
Blessings. Yeah.
Exactly. And I know that internally I have the resilience that it takes to get back up.
To improve your situation.
Exactly.
Yeah. I love that. So let's do a quick recap.
Yeah.
So today we talked about things falling into place. This idea really just came from just the comparison view of when things are falling apart, when things aren't going your way, when things are difficult. It's so hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel, to see your way through a situation. It's almost like we have blinders on.
Yeah.
So we talked about that difference and really got into our hows.
Yeah.
Today too.
We really talked about in the first step, looking at things that have happened in the past in our own lives, almost like a David Goggins cookie jar situation of things that we have overcome within our lives that allows us to recognize, okay, at that time, the world was ending, it was terrible, but I made it through and I persevered, I did this. And kind of using that to propel us, forward.
Yep.
And the step 2, we really talked about, Shane mentioned, how minute our situation is, whether that's, the day doesn't go well, I'm having a bad week, etc. That is a small, small moment in a lifetime of a journey, a story, your life that you can recognize, okay, let me get over this. It's one day. Tomorrow's going to be better.
Yeah.
This month isn't great. Next month's going to be better.
Yeah. And then our third how is really just how we need to see these as opportunities.
Yeah.
And be grateful for this opportunity to improve, to change, to push myself past what I'm comfortable with versus, this happened to me. We should be seeing it as this happened for me.
Completely. Then we got into the whys. Shane really summed up my why really well by talking about counting your blessings. Yep. There's a lot of things going on around us where it can feel like when you get the wrong sandwich order or the world is terrible, but there's so many good things that you have going for you, you will be able to bounce back.
Yeah. And my why was similar. It's really just a reminder for myself that we have to practice this. We have to remember that there are more days ahead. Comparatively just to this narrow lens that we have in these difficult situations.
Completely.
And I think that wraps another week of
What is Humans?
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening.